Alright folks, welcome to the beginning of Chapter 8. In Chapter 8 what we're going to do is we're going to create some respawn points or checkpoints, in case you die, like where you would respawn at. So I'm going to use the words checkpoint and spawn point interactively or interchangeably. And then we're going to create some places where the player dies. So if I hit start and my player goes, and so I've got a point here set to make my character die. So if I jump in, boom, it respawns me here. So eventually we'll have to die, make a die animation, things like that. But right now we're just trying to get the basic mechanics to work. Alright, so with Chapter 8, we're going to work with triggers. And a trigger is an invisible collision geometry that defines a space within a game. So triggers don't block or throw standard collision events. Triggers allow the character to pass through them, and then they typically activate a script. So if I were to create an empty game object and then attach a collider to it, and then set the collider for trigger, that's all it takes, and then the user can kind of go back and forth through it. It's invisible, nobody sees it in the game, and then I can attach that to script, or to a script. And then in the script, I can create the trigger. Now, it can be an on-trigger enter 2D, it can be an on-trigger exit 2D, or an on-trigger stay in 2D. So an enter 2D would be like when I get close to an automatic door, I want the door to open. Then an exit would be when I get away from the collider or the trigger, I want the door to close. And then a stay would be, let's say if I create an area of fire and the character walks into it, I want him to take damage as long as he stays within that collider. So I think for our script we're going to do on trigger enter. So like if the character enters an area where we want him to die, it's going to trigger. Alright, to add a trigger, again, you just create an empty game object, you name it. In this case you're going to name it checkpoint. Then you go to add component physics 2D and then add a box collider. And then you check the is trigger box, and then that collider then just becomes a trigger, an invisible trigger in the game that when a character hits there, something happens. And then you can use these triggers for all kinds of things, to spawn damage. Hey, if I walk into the fire, when I hit the certain point, it triggers spawning of monsters, that kind of stuff. So at this point, go ahead and create your first trigger. So remember, create an empty game object, checkpoint, add the physics collider, and make sure the is triggered box is checked. Alright, so here I am in my game. I'm going to go to game object, create empty. I'm going to rename it checkpoint and hit enter. And then I want to add component, physics, box collider, and boom, I've got it. Actually, I want to move my player a little bit away from there so we can see it. And then make sure in your collider that you're on the checkpoint, make sure is triggered is checked. Alright, then you can see, like when I turn the game on, I don't see that thing anywhere. So it's just an invisible trigger that we can use to trigger different events or scripts. Alright, moving on. If you go to page 137, you're going to right click in the scripts folder in the projects, and you're going to create a new script. You're going to name it checkpoint trigger and set the language to C+ or C#, and then you're going to type in the script at the bottom of page 137. Once you have that script done, you can click on the checkpoint game object and add the new script. So you can do it however you want to do it. That's usually typically the method I do, but there's the method in the book is just a little bit different. In the book, you go to the game object and you kind of create the script like right there in the game object. So you can create the game object. So game object, create empty. And then what do they want you to name this one? Oh, alright, game object, add the component, blah, blah. Oh, I'm sorry, not that a game object. Let me get rid of that one. They want you to go here, add component, script, but there's no script to add. So if you go to the book method, that's not going to work. There's nowhere where it says add, oh, there it is, I'm sorry, new script. And then you can do, now you can do it. So checkpoint trigger. And point is lowercase, and then trigger. And make sure it's C#, and then create an add. And then that creates the script. But then we got to move the script over to our script folder. So I don't know, but then you have it. So then you can open it up, and you're going to type in what he's got in there. So you can get rid of all this. And remember, I'm keeping that last curly brace there, because we've got a curly brace there, so we need a curly brace at the end. So just start right there, and then do your public bool is trigger and that kind of stuff. So after you create the variable, then you're creating a function, and the function is called onTriggerEnter2D. And the function is just going to say, if the player collides with this object, make isTriggered true. So once it's done, it should look like this. So we create our variable, and the variable is triggered. And if isTriggered is true, we want to send our guy to the spawn point. So then we have to have a method to say, hey, how do I turn isTriggered on? So we create a function, so void, and then we say if the collider tag of the object hitting our trigger is player. So if the tag is player, then inTriggered is true, and then we're going to do an event, or we're going to create something happening. So this script is the part that says, hey, when do I do the action? And then in the next script we're going to write, that's actually going to create the action. So on the collider itself, for the checkpoint, this is going to be true, so it was triggered. And then something I want to point out, remember, we talked about the tag earlier in like the first or second chapter, but if the tag is player, so if I save this, save, and if I go back to player, remember we talked about this tag. Tag is what we use to reference different objects in a script. So even though this is named player, if I wanted to reference it by some other way, I would just change the tag. So I can hit there and just add a different tag to it. So later on in this chapter, I think we were going to change some tags. Alright, so now I go to my checkpoint, make sure the checkpoint trigger is added there. And then now I'm all set. I'm about the middle of page 138 in your book. Now, I'm not going to go over too much stuff, again, and I tend to stay away from that because if I go over everything that's in the book, you won't read the book, and I want you guys to make sure that you read the book. So that's why I'll glance over stuff, or I won't go into everything that's in the script, or I won't say what each setting is, because it's very important that you read the book and take notes. Alright, so we got that stuff done. Then we want to do checkpoints. Now, checkpoints are very important because the player could miss them. If you've got somebody like, my daughter or me, and I'm just running around the game, la 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 la, and I'm kind of jumping around, I might miss the checkpoint. So if I leave my checkpoint this size, or if for some reason I put it down on the ground, and I start my game, and I'm just running around like this. La 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 la. I'm never going to hit that collider or that checkpoint. So we need to make sure that our checkpoints are big enough to make sure that the player will always have a chance to hit them. So, and then we have to make sure. Well, we already talked about it. So we got to make sure that they're the right size. That they got to be big enough to cover the entire movement range of the character. So some other things to think about when you're creating your checkpoint. You always want a spawn point at start of the game in case the character dies too soon. You have no idea who's going to play your game. It could be a 4 or 5-year-old, and he could die right away. So you got to have a spawn point right there at the start. You also need checkpoints or spawn points before the start of major obstacles or boss fights or things like that. And that way, if the player dies, which he typically has a good chance of dying the first time he encounters the major obstacles, he can respawn kind of like in front of those and try them again. And then you also need checkpoints in other places to avoid forcing the player to restart large chunks of the game. I don't know if you guys have ever played certain games, but there are some single-player games where there are certain checkpoints, and some of them are so far apart that you get near the end, really close to one checkpoint, and then you die, and you got to go all the way back to the previous checkpoint, and you got to go play another half-hour game all over again that you just got done. So you don't want to have too much space between your checkpoints. Typically, 10 minutes is about enough. If I can play and get through for 10 minutes, I typically need to add another checkpoint. Because you don't want the character repeating, or the player repeating, 15 to 20 minutes worth of effort if he dies. Alright, so then your book goes into bottom of page 138. It wants you to drag the checkpoint into scene 1. So I'm going to grab checkpoint and drag it into scene 1. So now it becomes a part of scene 1. And we're going to change the icon so we can see it. So if we just click on the little block, we can change the icon. And I'm just going to make it a green circle. Is that blue? Blue? Maybe that's green. We'll just assume that's green, and then click off. So now I've got a circle as something I can look at, something I can see. And then I want to change the tag and make sure that it's tagged as checkpoint, because in my next script I'm going to start referencing it by its tag. So I want to go here, add tag, and then plus sign, and I want to add the tag as checkpoint. Now, resist the urge to do camel casing and make checkpoint, make the P capitalized. And so now checkpoint is on, it has a tag of checkpoint. Alright, so then in the transform values, you want this to be at 1.5. Need to put my numlock on. So 1.5, and then you want this at 1.5, and then leave Z to 0. And then go to the box collider. Now in the box collider it says size and center, so be careful. You want to go to size, not offset. So in the size we want to go to 1 and 13. So 1 and 13. Whoa! So now we got a big old thing. And then we want to go to offset. And it used to have been listed as center values or center. And now we're just going to change this to 0 and 6. And now we get a nice big, there's no way my character could miss this. So that's what you typically want, like if you have checkpoints for save games or things like that. You want to make sure that your character can't miss them. In this case, this one's just going to be a spawn point, but we're working on that technique as well. And then finally they wrap up on page 139 by saying, hey, make sure that is checked that it is trigger. Alright, then we move on to page 140, and now we're going to create a new character and call it Pit. So I'm on a little bit lower than the middle page, so create an empty game object called Pit. Game object, create empty, we're going to call this one Pit. Now I'm going to close screen 1 and then go to Pit. Now I'm good. Alright, now set the recognizable icon as a red circle. So I remember I click on this little box and I want to be a red circle, and that way we can identify it. And then we're going to add a component, physics, 2D box collider, and then we're going to make sure that the is triggered is true. Alright, in step 5 we want to drag it somewhere. So in our case we're going to drag it here, so I'm just going to get rid of these. Come on, you stupid crazy thing. Alright, and then I'm going to go grab my box collider and use the rec. Oh, really? Come on. Get over. You little. Oh, it's going to be one of these days. Now, I'm going to drag this underneath. Come on, move. And then zoom in, because I want you guys to be able to see this. So there's my collider. We need to make sure that it covers, or it does the entire object, or the entire space. So we want to make sure that when my character hits the water, that that his collider hits this collider. So we need to make it bigger. So we're going to change the size to, nope, that's not going to be enough. 4, I think 5 will do it. 5, yeah, 5. So 5 is a perfect space, even though I don't necessarily need to cover this block or this block, because there's no way my character could get in there. And then I'm going to say this is going to be 2. So now my box collider is big. So I'm going to put it all the way up here, and you can see it here on that line. So that way, as soon as my character hits the water, he'll go down a little bit, and then it'll hit the collider. Now you can do it anywhere you want. You can put the collider up there, so if he even gets, but then like you don't really see him hitting the water. So I think in the book they put it right here on the line, like right at the top of the block. I'm just going to leave mine up about halfway in the water, but the reason is so that you guys can see that. All right, then of course we're going to add a script to make something happen. So add component, scroll down, new script, and then they want this script to be called Pit Trigger. So Pit Trigger, and create an ad. And then again, when you create that, it goes into the asset folder. So then you need to go move it to your script folder, because you want to keep everything all nice and neat. And then if you turn to page 142, woo, you get to put all that script in there. So I'm going to go type up the script, and then I'll be back. Alright, once your script is done and you hit File Save, you should look over to the left and see if you've got any errors. Now, obviously, I've got an error. And then you need to obviously troubleshoot your errors. Now, sometimes it's just a coding issue where I know that the very first time I wrote this, I had here at line 32. So here at line 32, I had a capital T for this transform, and I was getting some weird error message. So luckily, most of the time, if you're in mono develop, it shows you in red, the problem area. If it doesn't, it gives you the line number or something. Like you can see here, it's telling me line 34 is my issue. So if I go to line 34, I can kind of figure out where the issue is. Now, my issue is I'm looking for checkpoint trigger, and I named it checkpoint trigger with lowercase. So I need to go back through my script, and I need to make that a lowercase p, make that a lowercase p, and then save. And then if I hit clear, there, it goes away. So now I'm all set. Now, normally I like to include the scripts for you guys, but this time I'm not going to, because if you type this one the way he's got it listed, it will work. And that way, I want you guys to work on typing these scripts in so you kind of get a hang of it. Alright, so then about on page 143, he kind of goes over the script and what everything does. Until about the middle of page 144, and then we get into creating collectibles. So at this point, everything should work out. Let me zoom out, grab my player. Now, they also want you to put the pit wherever it's going to show, and in this case, like if I click the block, I know I'm in scene 3, so they want you to grab the pit and move that to scene 3. And now it's in, and that way everything is contained within its scene folder. So then I want to grab the player. Come on, boy, get over here. And now I'm all set. So now I can kind of zoom in. Now, if everything is right, when the first time you jump in the water, bloop, should respawn you there. Now, it doesn't work for multiple. Oh, it did. The first time I did this, it didn't work if I did it over and over again, or it aired out like that. So I don't know if it's just maybe you have to do it a couple times or something, but obviously just make sure it happens the first time. And you can see I got an error in my script. The object type transform has been destroyed, but you're still trying to do something weird with it. So I'm good for now as long as it works the first time. As long as I can just do it once, jump in and all right, clear that. Alright, and then I'm good. So as long as that works once, you're all set. Alright, and then in the next part of the video, we'll talk about the collectible coins and stuff and see if we can get the collection part working. Alright guys, at this point you should be at near the middle of page 144 where it says creating collectibles. So for the second part, I'm going to have you follow the book and see if you can put it together. And if you do it right, it should turn out like this, where my little guy, he's going to hit this box, the box is going to change, which tells me that I did hit the box and it's already been activated, and then a coin's going to go flying out. And boom. Alright, a couple things to note though while you're going through there. On page 145, that stuff is already done. First off, it says select the coin prefab, and if I go to my prefab folder and hit coin, a bunch of coins show up. So there's a bronze coin, there's a gold coin, stuff like that. So when I first got to those directions, I had no idea what, because it just says select the coin prefab. There is no coin prefab, so there's a bunch of different ones. But doesn't matter, you're going to skip all that stuff, because if I go to bronze coin, you'll see like the radius is already 0.3, and the is triggered is already checked. So you do not have to do the stuff on 145, or those instructions. Now you do have to make the script at the bottom of page 145. And then 146, everything's good. 147. On 147, at the bottom it says preparing the coin box prefabs. And it says create an empty game object and coin box and add a sprite renderer. Now, if I create a game object and I try to add a sprite renderer, if I go to add component rendering, there's nothing that says sprite render. Oh, actually, there it is, right there. Duh, I missed it. When I first looked, I couldn't find it, so I went here to component rendering and I just added it that way. So either way is fine. Alright, then my next note, everything was good, everything was good. You come to a big script on page 150. That's not really, it's just half a page. No big deal. Oh, and then you get to a script on page 152. When you get to that page and you type that script in, you're going to see an error, especially for the add force. And then if after you save it and you go back to your scene, it'll ask you, do you want to update the APIs? And then it'll fix that for you automatically. And then on page 153, they tell you to go to the disabled one, and they tell you to put in a size. Until you put this size in and hit enter, these elements won't show up. So if you look, it says 4, 5, and 6. Drag, this element to element 0, this one to element 1, this one to element 3. But you can't; these things don't show up until you put 3 in here and hit enter. So when you look at it, it'll just be like this. So when you get to page 153, hit that little drop down, put 3 in, hit enter, and then these 3 elements will pop up for you. And that was all I had in my notes. Everything else seemed like it was good. So at that point, that's going to be your lab for this week. You're going to turn in that level at this point. And I'm going to check your box spawners or your coin boxes to see how they work. So remember, do the stuff early. If you run into issues and more than, I don't know, 1 or 2 of you actually say, hey, I'm having a problem with this, I will make a video and I'll walk you through the rest of that part. But if just 1 or 2 of you are having a problem, I'll probably just answer your questions and kind of go from there. So just remember to start early so you got time to answer questions and get it done. And it's due Sunday this week. So have a great week.